Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We have two wonderful poets with us today, David Trinidad and Suzanne Buffam. David will read first and then Suzanne. David Trinidad's numerous books include Sleeping with Basho, Digging to Wonderland, Memory Pieces, Notes on a Past Life, Peyton Place, a haiku soap opera, and The Late Show, Hollywood Cemetery, which I read thanks to David, and it's a loving tribute. He gets inside of these characters from old Hollywood and brings them to life, and I just love it. And new playlists are forthcoming in 2025 from Gray Linden Press and Pitt Poetry Series, respectively. He is also the editor of A Fast Life, the collected poems of Tim DeLugos, Punk Rock is Cool for the End of the World poems, and notebooks of Ed Smith, and divining poets Dickinson and Emily Dickinson tarot deck. Trinidad lives in Los Angeles. And David also studied with a poet I studied with, whom we both love and who's one of the best poets to ever come out of LA, and Stanford. There are wholeness, harmony, clarity, and precision in David's poetry. It's refreshingly new. A brilliant poet, David Trinidad.
Thank you, Harry. It's an honor to read for you and to read with Suzanne. I grew up in Chatsworth in the 1960s, and in those days, Chatsworth felt isolated and contained, almost like a small town in the Northwest Valley. And I spent my adolescence seeing as many movies as I could in local theaters and on television. The Late Show, circa 1970. Natalie Wood, in the middle of reciting a Wordsworth poem, bursts into tears and runs out of the classroom. Carol Baker gasps in an oxygen tent, her platinum Harlow hair damp and flat. Kim Stanley throws a champagne glass at her mother's taxi, screaming, "There is no God, there is no God." In a chiffon cocktail dress and ankle straps, Joan Crawford staggers down the beach, convinced her lover, Jeff Chandler, is out to murder her. Lana Turner learns that she and her daughter, Sandra Dee, are in love with the same man. Jilted and demented, Susie Parker crouches in an alleyway in a soiled trench coat, sifting through Louis Jourdain's trash. To avoid forging the signature of her twin sister, whom she's killed, Betty Davis grabs the red-hot end of a fire iron with her writing hand. Doris Day, in a black lace peignoir, sobs into the telephone, "Who are you? Why are you doing this to me?" Julie Harris hears Hill House beckoning. Geraldine Page begs Paul Newman for a fix. Simone Signoret wipes her fingerprints off the glass as James Caan collapses dead at her feet. Lee Remick pours herself another drink. Trembling, Ingrid Bergman watches the gaslights dim. Shirley MacLaine breaks down, admits her attraction to Audrey Hepburn. Barbara Stanwyck tries to keep Capucine. Elizabeth Taylor scrawls with lipstick, "No sale," across a mirror. Deborah Carr smolders. Shelley Winters shrieks. Kim Novak screams and backs out of the bell tower into thin air. Ode to Thelma Ritter. There's no one like you in the movies anymore, Thelma. No lovable middle-aged character actress, gravelly voiced and hard-boiled, with a sharp-tongued flair for the cynical as well as the comical. You could work miracles with a little screen time, turning out indelible performances in a matter of minutes. Betty Davis's acerbic sidekick in All About Eve, Jimmy Stewart's down-to-earth nurse in Rear Window, Doris Day's perpetually hungover maid in Pillow Talk. You played women with names like Clancy, Aggie, Bertha, Birdie, Lottie, Lena, Della, Stella, Sophie, Sadie, Maud, May, and Mo. But what of you, Thelma? Online, I find only this mini biography. Born in Brooklyn on Valentine's Day in 1905, trained at American Academy of Dramatic Arts, stage career mostly unsuccessful, married Joseph Moran in 1927, briefly gave up acting to raise 2 children, started working again in radio in 1940, bit part in Miracle on 34th Street, launched noteworthy screen career, appeared in 30 films between 1947 and 1968, died of a heart attack in 1969 in New York. Thelma, 6 times you were nominated for Best Supporting Actress, and 6 times you lost. You, who could save any movie with your wisecracks. A Google search uncovers this little-known fact. Shirley Booth was not the first choice to play Hazel. Thelma Ritter was. Miss Ritter wanted the role badly, but due to illness had to bow out. Booth would win 2 Emmys in the early 60s for playing television's sassiest maid, your rightful part. Oh, elusive trophies. Oh, tired heart. You, who survived the Titanic in one picture, would say sadly, whirled wearily in the next, I have to go on making a living so I can die. My peacoat. Lorene, a friend from my high school drama class, called and said she'd read that Western Costume, the company that supplied costumes to the movie studios, was selling off a large part of their inventory. Did I want to go? My mother gave me permission and $10. What kind of costume could I buy with only $10? That Saturday morning, we drove to Hollywood, 1970, the air still relatively crisp, the sky still relatively blue. Lorene let me smoke in her car. Driving anywhere outside of the valley was an adventure, a glimpse of the still relatively scary real world. We parked on Melrose Avenue down the street from Paramount Pictures and walked to the monolithic costume warehouse. Once inside, we encountered row after row of floor-to-ceiling clothing. Lorene found several items, including a theatrical fur-trimmed stole that she ever after referred to as her countess wrap. I don't know what drew me to the peacoat. I pulled it from a rack of densely packed jackets, a heavy wool, double-breasted navy blue coat with anchors on its 6 plastic buttons. It fit just right and cost $10. I loved my peacoat, wore it everywhere. I can see myself trudging to high school on a chilly morning, light fog drifting over clipped suburban hedges, furtively lighting a cigarette, then slipping my pack of Marlboro 100s back into one of its slit pockets. In time, the inside lining split. My peacoat began to fall apart. Undoubtedly, it ended up in a bag destined for the Goodwill. Decades later, I have to ask, how many extras are wearing my peacoat in old war movies? Aren't all of our clothes costumes? Was I a sailor in a past life? My next poem was inspired by a poem by Weldon Keys, so I thought I'd read his first. He mentions Milton Sills and Doris Kenyon, who were silent movie stars. 1926. The porch light coming on again, early November, the dead leaves raked in piles, the wicker swing creaking. Across the lots, a phonograph is playing Jada. An orange moon. I see the lives of neighbors mapped and marred like all the wars ahead. And R insane, B with his throat cut 15 years from now in Omaha. I did not know them then. My Airedale scratches at the door, and I am back from seeing Milton Sills and Doris Kenyon, 12 years old, the porch light coming on again. And this is mine. 1968. The porch light will be on, waiting for me when I come home from babysitting. Almost every Saturday night, I sit for a couple who live one street over from us at the end of a cul-de-sac. The wife teaches ballet. The husband is handsome. They have 2 young girls. I am 15 years old. I earn money babysitting and also mow lawns so I can buy books about the movies, the films of Greta Garbo, the films of Marilyn Monroe, Judy, the films and career of Judy Garland, the Academy Awards, a pictorial history. The girls have Barbie dolls. I watch them play, even pick up a doll and slip her into a dress. It's safe in this context. After they go to sleep, I sit in an armchair in the family room and watch Mannix on their TV. Mike Connors has dark hair and is handsome like the husband. Then I watch Cinema 13 on Channel 13, the only place you can see adult-themed movies, albeit edited. The Pawnbroker, about a concentration camp survivor. Mondo Cane, shocking. 90 Degrees in the Shade, steamy. A Taste of Honey, about a pregnant teenager. One Potato, Two Potato, about an interracial relationship. When the couple comes home, the husband always drives me to my house. Why? It's only a block and a half away. The world is a dangerous place, but surely our suburb is still safe. Does his wife insist? What do we talk about, if anything, on that short drive? I can smell cigarettes, alcohol on his breath. They've been to a party. I look over at his profile, lit by the dashboard, framed in the window like a leading man. Houses glide past in darkness behind him. Our house is yellow. The porch light glows. The handsome husband waits for me to turn the key and go inside before he drives off. I'm very happy to be reading with Suzanne. We met in Chicago and have been friends for over 20 years. We share a love of miniatures. I wrote this poem to accompany a gift I gave her for her dollhouse, an ornate little wall mirror. Miniature for Suzanne Buffam. Every dollhouse should have a mirror so its inhabitant, in this case you, can see herself, or at least one eye, peering like Alice into the tiny keyhole. Every book should have a poem small enough to slip through on the flood of her tears. This poem is composed of movie titles. Can you tell I custom made my reading for nature poem? Till the clouds roll by, a patch of blue. How green was my valley, splendor in the grass. The petrified forest, the river of no return. Lilies of the field, the bad seed. A tree grows in Brooklyn, autumn leaves. Lost horizon, gone with the wind. For the past 3 or 4 years, I've been obsessed with Hollywood films from the pre-code era, the early 1930s. So I'm still watching as many movies as I can. K. Francis, The Diary of a Movie Star. What could be more glamorous, but not for the reasons you'd suppose. It was among the papers she donated to the Museum of the City of New York in 1968, the year of her death. Much of the diary is in shorthand and had to be decoded. She chronicles her love affairs, yes, and her friendships with gay men. Her studio reportedly paid one of them to keep her out of mischief. But it turns out she was underwhelmed by stardom, which makes her a heroine in my book. To earn it by disdaining it, says Emily Dickinson, is fame's consummate fee. Not that Frances was ungrateful. She was one of the highest paid actresses in the first half of the 1930s, the worst years of the Depression. She just didn't like getting up at 5:45 a.m. to be fitted for evening gowns. I can't wait to be forgotten, she wrote in her diary, with perfect, as Marianne Moore would say, contempt. What could be more glamorous than that? In old cartoons, if you are a child of the Great Depression, dressed in rags and always hungry, have no fear. Tonight you can visit dreamland and shake new clothes like leaves off the limbs of a tree. You can pluck a cone from the ice cream patch and pour from a calla lily syrup all over it. You'll squeal with delight as you ride an animal cracker on the chocolate merry-go-round cake and catch in a buttercup popcorn falling like snow. If, on the other hand, you find yourself painted on a Dutch plate, no worries. When the grown-ups are asleep, you will come alive and dance in your wooden shoes as the beer steins clap their lids in accompaniment. But oh, if you should find yourself in balloon land, beware. You're just filled with air and your skin is thin. Lurking in the forest is the pincushion man who wears a thimble for a hat and throws sewing pins like daggers, and whose sole purpose is to pop you. I have a new chapbook that Harry mentioned from Green Linden Press called Hollywood Cemetery, and this is it. I don't know if you can see it, yes. In it, I speak as 35 dead movie actors, as in Edgar Lee Masters' Spoon River anthology, in which he speaks as hundreds of dead souls in a cemetery. Suzanne, in her blurb, called them mordant epitaphs, and I'll end with a few of them. Warren Heimer, 1906 to 1948, mugshot. I was typecast as a tough, you know, Brooklyn accent, dumbest mug on the cell block. My filmography reads like a rap sheet. Spike, Hype, Big Shot, Bugs, Butch, Dutch, Louis the Lug. And I was Yale educated. But maybe I wasn't so smart after all. Drunk, I could get belligerent. So when Columbia head Harry Cohn pissed me off, I broke into his office and pissed on his desk. The bastard had me blackballed after that. Marie Prevost, 1896 to 1937, Chubby Saloon Girl. Chubby Saloon Girl is how she was credited in one of her final films. You should have seen me in my silent days, black hair piled atop my head, pale oval face, red bee-stung lips. By the time I died of acute alcoholism at age 40, I'd become, let's be honest, the overweight comic relief. with that cloying little girl voice. My body lay undiscovered for 2 days. I died practically destitute. Joan Crawford had to pay for my funeral. This so shocked the Hollywood community, they established the Motion Picture Country House in Woodland Hills, a retirement facility that has enabled countless members of the profession to pass away, unlike yours truly, with dignity. Isabel Keith, 1898 to 1979. 5 seconds of fame. There's no reason to know who I am, though I'm there in 42 films, like an old tree, as the poet Anne Sexton once wrote, in the background. I'm William Powell's secretary, Miss Adams, in Manhattan Melodrama, the last movie that the gangster John Dillinger saw. They say he liked it so much he stayed to see it twice, and that was his undoing. It gave the police time to mobilize. In Their Own Desire, starring Norma Shearer, I'm snooty party guest. In Reckless, starring Jean Harlow, I'm woman in audience who throws purse. 7 times I was called upon to play nurse. If you ever get the chance to see The Women in His Life, 1933, don't pass it by. It's shown from time to time on TCM. When Otto Kruger, who plays a brilliant though flawed criminal defense attorney, learns that the woman he once loved is dead, he staggers through a cemetery at night in the pouring rain in search of her grave and ends up in the hospital with pneumonia. I'm proud of the way I deliver my one line. In white uniform and cap, I caution a visitor, don't stay more than a few minutes. He's still very weak. My 5 seconds, like life itself, over in a flash. Thank you.
Thank you, David, for such a beautiful reading. You see so much in the movies and so acutely, and the actors, among other things. And I always love the clarity in your writing. And you're such a sharp observer. So I just love all that. And you are, as I mentioned, a true movie lover. And we have a few minutes left, and we could go on and talk about your writing. Your writing certainly speaks for itself. You're one of the best poets that ever come out of LA. And I've always admired your work. Even as a young man, I remember the first time I read your first book. I never know how to pronounce it, Pavan or Pavan.
Pavan, yeah, Pavan.
Pavan, and it was just so much. You were such a mature. You made such a mature debut. You always seemed so mature, even as a young man, in terms of literature. I would like to ask you a question. What are your top 10 favorite movies of all time?
Oh, God. Do we have a few hours? I think at the top of the list, I would have to put Vertigo, because it had such an impact on me when I was a teenager. And I feel like it's one of those movies that has haunted me my entire life. I think primarily for what it says about the illusory nature of desire. I think that's why I always go back to it. And actually, I'm seeing it on the big screen tomorrow night yet again. So, and there are many movies. I mean, there's so many movies that were important to me, especially when I was young, like Sunday Bloody Sunday, The Boys in the Band, Inside Daisy Clover. I love that movie. I've always loved that movie, and I've seen that many times. Dinner at 8. And I discovered one in my love, this new love of pre-code movies, Counselor at Law. It's an ensemble piece with John Barrymore, Bibi Daniels, Isabel Jewell, and Doris Kenyon, who Weldon Keys mentioned in his poem. I find it fascinating and moving. and it came out on Blu-ray recently. So that's a recent one. Yeah. I don't think I said 10 though, did I? I don't think I did, but there's so many more, of course.
I love movies. Every morning I get up and I check TCMs and write down the movies I want to see. And one thing, among others, things that I love was in that first poem you mentioned Geraldine Paige and Kim Stanley. And as a young actor, when I was studying acting in New York, 63 to 68, all of us just admired, looked up to those two women. They were our models. Okay, they weren't the Hollywood stars. They weren't Ingrid Bergman among others. We always just really loved them, and so I really appreciate your love of movies. And
one I didn't mention was Ordinary People, which was always important to me in the way it helped me deal with my own grief long before I was able to fully deal with it on my own. So I love movies that sort of help you to live, like that.
Well, one time we did a show on poets talking about movies, and I did a piece, and the end of it was I said I go to movies to live life more fully.
Yeah.
And everybody had a different reason of going, escape, entertainment, etc. There's a book out called The 70s, The Decade That Changed Film Forever by Vincent LaBruto. And he talked about old Hollywood glamour and entertainment. And then the new movies, directed by film school grads, it became more a vision of the director, but the old movies, we all love the old movies. And, I'm so appreciative of your vision and your love of movies. When did two quick questions. We have like 2 minutes left.
Okay.
When did you write your first poem? And secondly, who were the poets that influenced you before you started writing poetry regularly and in a serious way?
Wait, did you say my first poem?
Yes. When did you write the first poem?
I was in elementary school and we were studying the chaparral. So I wrote this little rhyme poem called In the Chaparral, which I no longer have, but I as a kid I only remember one line. It's about animals cavorting in the bushes, right? And it was witchy squirrels flying on brooms. And as a kid, I was like fascinated with witches and mermaids. So there's a squirrel witch in that poem. The poets who influenced me, I think I would have to say, well, Anne Stanford, who you mentioned, who we both studied with, and I think it was her encouragement. I don't think I'd be sitting here without having known her. I mean, her encouragement made me believe I could be a poet. I didn't really even want to be a poet, at that point. I wanted to write novels, but she helped lead me towards poetry. And her own poetry was an example that has also stayed with me my entire life as a kind of beacon, So yeah, and then I began to find on my own, the other poets who helped me along, like Anne Sexton and Sylvia Plath initially, and then all the friends I met in Los Angeles, and you're one of them, in the late 70s, early 80s, who were on the LA scene,
I love Anne Stanford too, as you know, and I love Anne Sexton. So thank you, David Trinidad, for such an illuminating poetry reading, and you really touched all of our hearts here at MPTF with your choices. So thank you very much.
Thanks.
Our next poet is Suzanne Buffam. Suzanne Buffam is the author of 3 collections of poetry, the most recent of which, A Pillow Book, was named a Best Book of the Year by the New York Times. Her work has recently appeared or is forthcoming in Harper's, the New York Review of Books, and A Public Space. She teaches at the University of Chicago. I use the word true in this next sentence, and when I use that word true, it means it refers to her poem On Last Lines. I read that short poem, about a lover's complaint, and I showed that to a bunch of people. I just love that poem. Suzanne's poetry is concise, surprising, sagacious, wondrous, and true. Here's a marvelous poet, Suzanne Buffam.
Thank you so much, Harry. It's really lovely to be here, and especially wonderful to be reading following David, though I'd rather have read before you, David, so I didn't have to actually follow you. But though I loved hearing your poems, and in preemptive answer to a question about what poets have been influential on me, I would put David up there in the top, I don't know, number. In any case, I'm going to begin by reading excerpts from a translation I have been working on. I've been translating a book by a French experimental poet who has authored over 20 books. But the book I've translated is her first book, which is a pretty slim little volume published in, I believe, in the 90s. That consists of a series of very short, sort of pithy and odd observations about very mundane, quotidian things. It's divided into 3 sections. There's a section about driving in one's car, being in one's home, and then the 3rd section is about, I guess, basically being in one's body. And they're curious little objectivist kind of aperçus that are delivered in almost like totally flat affect that I find just estranging enough to make me kind of reawaken to my own body and space and experience the world just from a slightly refreshed perspective after spending time with these poems. So I'll just read a few excerpts from this and then read some of my own work. So from Observations, her name, which I don't want to forget to mention, is Natalie Quintane, Quintane. And this is from section 1, In the Car. The more I raise my window, the more the engine masks the sound of the wind. I slow down. My car jumps a little, and I jump a little with it. A speed bump. Just as I'm passing her car, a little girl sticks her face against the glass. There's a white disc in place of her nose. When the trunk opens, it carries my hand along with it. They're redoing the road. The gravel sounds like hail against the undercarriage. At the crossing, I stop thinking to watch the train go by. Without an exhaust pipe, it's much harder to think while driving. Sometimes an unexpected speed bump cuts a sentence in half. Sometimes, when I have a song stuck in my head with a particularly catchy rhythm, I accelerate. Even if it isn't raining, my windshield gets drenched when I drive past sprinklers in a field. And here are some from the section about being in one's home. I think the section is basically just called House, Maison. Even if their corners weren't right angles, the walls wouldn't collapse. It's never daylight with the shutters closed, but it's not always night either. In an apartment building, we know our neighbor by the noises he makes. The fewer the doors, the fewer the rooms. In a room chiefly comprised of a couch, it feels wrong to sit on a chair. Instant soup doesn't mean you have to eat your soup in an instant. Sometimes, while you're looking for your phone, a phone rings on TV. Passing through a window doesn't make it a door. If we knock down a wall between a living room and a bedroom, what remains? The living room or the bedroom? Sunlight falling on a bowl of milk reflects on the ceiling and draws a wavering spiral that dilates and contracts when the table moves. And then here is from the third untitled section that, as I say, really is about, there's sort of somatic observations about what it means to live in a body or how it feels. Whether it comes from in front or from behind, when the wind blows hard, I lean forward. When I walk, one of my feet has always just disappeared behind me. Depending on where I scratch on my body, I produce a different sound. In summer, after having sat for a long time on the terrace, I often discover, imprinted on the backs of my thighs, the pattern of the chair. Although my bedroom is completely dark, I close my eyes to sleep. When I roll up the sleeves of my sweater, my elbow bends keep them from slipping. Even when I look behind me, I keep seeing what's in front of my eyes. When I drink, my lower lip stays dry. While taking a sip of water, I quickly throw back my head when swallowing a pill. On the left side of my right index finger, near the nail, there's a bump, fairly firm, followed by a little dent. That's where I rest my pen when I write. The harder the fingernail, the farther it leaps at the last snip of the scissors. After styling my hair, I gather the strands left behind on the brush. I stretch out my arm out the window and open my hand. Then I watch as they follow the wind. When a bottle is tipped vertically onto my lips, it means I'm drinking the last drops. So that's just an assortment. There are dozens and dozens. But yeah, that's Natalie Quintan from her book Observations, which I have not yet published, but I've got a few lines out. So keep your eyes peeled. And now I'm going to read some new work that has yet to be collected in a book, but many of which have appeared in various places over the last few years or are forthcoming. And they're all prose. This is something that I share with David, as a love of this sort of hybrid poem prose thing that's somewhere between a story or a memoir or a poem that happens usually in a pretty quick space. Some of these are quite short. There's one that's a good deal less concise than Harry, you generously said about my other poems. I would put it in the nearly long-winded category, but you'll see what the point of that is. So the first piece is called Succession. The cactus thrived until they brought home the goldfish, which thrived until they brought home the dog. When they brought home the baby, they sent the dog to live with her mother, who sent him to live on a farm. Now the baby, too, has been replaced, this time by a toddler who casts aside her dolls one by one each time a new one is placed in her lap. Easy math. I once knew a man who was convinced he wouldn't live past 56. 56 at 23 seemed fair enough to him. Keats, he pointed out, didn't live past 25. Yesterday, I learned that man is still alive, somewhere on the far side of the country with a wife and young twins, teaching high school English behind a bushy graying beard. Is he still writing that masterpiece? He's got 4 years. Baby on board. The baby's blameless. I can't argue with that. She hasn't told a single lie in her life, let alone cheated, however inadvertently, on her taxes, failed to properly dispose of toxic paint, padded a year-end report, however inadvertently, spat up red wine all over a vintage mohair blanket in an ex-boyfriend's parents' ski lodge on New Year's Eve, and then shoved it under the couch without mentioning it to anyone, or flicked a candy wrapper out the window of a Subaru stuck in traffic while pretending to adjust the side view mirror. Her conscience, if a baby can be said to have a conscience at all, is infinitely clearer than any middle-aged woman's, I grant. On the other hand, most middle-aged women I know have done at least some good in the world so far, however inadvertently, and may well be in the process of doing more at this moment. Rage cleaning a spice rack, say, or reposting a Substack, aerating a compost pile, regulating a drug trial, feeding honeybees, teaching refugees, or even just sitting in traffic on the expressway en route to a mommy and me kinder music class across town while daddy polishes his tenure file, whereas baby, so feeble she can't even buckle up the harness on her own crusty car seat, craps in her seat and wakes screaming. In some cultures, a baby isn't even given a name until her 5th birthday, I once read. It is the elders in those cultures whose safe passage on the journey must above all be ensured, and baby who must earn her seat of honor on board. Mamacita. A young man saunters towards me in the street, smirking salaciously. My spine stiffens instinctively. My eyes narrow into slits. I feel the gears inside my body seize up. At the same time, I can't help feeling perplexed. I'm wearing pajamas, men's pajamas, a parka, and a pair of fuzzy purple socks stuffed inside Crocs. I'm squinting at the sun through bent progressives and swinging a baggie full of dog poop in my fist. What's more, I'm old enough to be this kid's mom. I steal a glance at his face as he glides past. Mamacita, he coos and smacks a kiss at the dog. If you're noticing a theme of the reckonings of a middle-aged woman with the encroaching of late middle age, I too have noticed a similar theme. This piece addresses that as well. It's called, well, it's 3 consolations. 1, you look like an old woman when you wear your hair like that, the child says. Don't worry, Mama, she pats the woman's cheek. Just your face. 2, it must be nice to have somewhere soft to rest your chin, the child says, reaching up to stroke the folds of the woman's bent neck. 3, look, the child says, raising her eyes from the textbook in her lap and pointing to the deepening crease between the woman's furrowed brows. The Chinese character for day. So this is a slightly longer piece. It's called A Solemn Vow. I will respond when directly addressed. It would be cruel to those I live with to do otherwise. I will speak, it can't be helped, to the man behind the counter at the corner store, if only to request something out of reach or to thank him for my change at the till. I may not be able to avoid the odd remark about the weather while I'm at it, or the occasional friendly inquiry about his daughter in law school or his upcoming retirement and return to Suez, and in turn I may find myself obliged from time to time to disclose a detail or two of my own, my summer plans, for example, or my fears about the upcoming election. It would be churlish not to greet my neighbors in the street, or not to come to the door when I hear his cart stop at my stoop to thank the new mailman Scott in his torn shirt sleeves and trucker hat, and engage, for the sake of civility, in a brief back and forth about my next door neighbor's lax yard work, the mayor's latest evasion, or the likelihood of another spring flood. When I meet the other mothers in the schoolyard, it would be unfeeling, I can't help feeling, not to delve discreetly into their setbacks. L's upcoming lumpectomy, J's mother's foreclosure, D's interminable divorce, and to share a trial or two of my own. My husband's incessant travel, for example, or my child's mounting insolence, or my increasingly intractable inability to compose more than a sentence or two at a stretch before lapsing into dejection. And later, at the head of the seminar table, where I will have no recourse but to sit, I will be contractually bound to expound at some length on the texts I have assigned to my students, and to heap praise alongside carefully worded critique on their tentative, undisciplined attempts. Much as in meetings, in the copy room, and over boxed wine and cold cuts at campus events, I may find myself compelled, for the sake of solidarity, to engage in awkward banter with my colleagues and to supply, should the subjects arise, an opinion or two about the hiring freeze, the unequal distribution of administrative tasks among untenured faculty, or the slavish courting of new donors demanded of our department by the dean. When I meet a thoughtless driver on the street, a shrieking toddler in the theater, a group of rowdy teens in a museum, or when a man of any age approaches within earshot at the beach and begins to strum an acoustic guitar, I may fail to smother an audible snarl. Nor can I promise to suppress a sharp remark about the art, the acid jazz, the drafty doorway, or the dearth of walnuts in my walnut toffee tart when dining out. I may, against my will, to break some ice, attempt a joke. I may unwittingly talk back to the TV. I may succumb, when tuning into the news, to passing bouts of hysterical laughter in my car, in my kitchen, and all too often while crossing the quad, and later at the dinner table, to the robotic recitation of unsolicited statistics about voter turnout, say, the desertification of Iraq, or the massive forecasted growth of the household pet obesity management market and dependent submarkets around the globe. I must speak, sometimes sternly, to the dog. I must spare a few tender words of encouragement for the listless ficus in the foyer, a whispered word now and then for this, a whispered magic word now and then for the sticky garage clicker, a morning mantra for the mirror, and I may on occasion direct a string of expletives at the printer when it jams, runs out of ink, or quits inexplicably in the middle of a job, and at the microwave, the toasters, the electric kettle, or the blender or the stove when a fuse short circuits or a plastic knob snaps off unaccountably in my hand. I must answer the phone and the door on occasion and call the plumber, the electrician, the appliance repairman, the bank, the pediatrician, the pharmacist, the dentist, the gas company, the vet, the snow removal service, the roofer, my accountant, my representative, my parents, and a limited selection of other loved ones scattered all over creation. And over lunch with my friends, walking home from school through the dusky streets with my child, or lying in bed next to my husband in the dark, I may, perforce, share a word or two of unsolicited advice. A snort of mirth now and then can't be helped, nor can sputters of pain, thrills of bliss, chortles of pride, coos of approval, clucks of judgment, gasps of anguish, grunts of umbrage, Squeals of glee, snarls of pique, strangled titters of schadenfreude, indecipherable emanations of ennui, hoots of exuberance, ululations of rage, brief ejaculations of wrath, sighs of vexation, resignation, remorse, and relief, nor, for that matter, the occasional, ineluctable, barely audible sob for no discernible reason at all. Beyond these passing interruptions, however, which, I repeat, can't be helped, and which comprise altogether no more than a few waking hours of every day of my life, I will maintain henceforth, in accordance with this vow, a silence serene and eloquent as a car alarm dismantled before dawn. And I will close with a prose piece called Woman Running. Look at that strange woman running. There's no bus in sight. No one seems to be chasing her. No one else is even on the street at this hour. She is not running very quickly, mind you, but she is definitely not walking. She cannot possibly be jogging in that sarong. Maybe she is simply running late. If so, for what? Even the songbirds and the sirens are asleep. If only we could get a better look at her face. But she has crossed the street now. She has passed the bus stop, and she has not slowed down. In fact, she seems to be picking up speed. All we can see now are the ghostly soles of her sandals lifting from the pavement as she sprints into the mist. How long has she been running? How much longer is she going to be running? Thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne. Your poetry is transfixing. You're such a masterful writer, and you have such a love of humanity, love of your family, and you see so much. You're such an acute observer. And, those early poems that you translated, there was, objectivism and also the silence in between. And, strangely enough, or maybe not, but I find comfort in your poetry, and it just so inventive, and there's also a serenity in your work that I cherish, listening to you and having read what I have been able to in the short time that I've been after I asked you. So thank you for such a wonderful reading. A couple of questions to you. When did you write your first poem?
Yeah, okay. Well, the first poem I wrote that first poem I remember writing was for a assignment in school. We were studying ballads, and this was in elementary school. And I wrote a ballad, kind of in the style and meter of Robert Service's "The Cremation of Sam McGee." Being Canadian, these were poems we read in school, and I wrote a kind of really embarrassingly terrible, but kind of mock epic ballad about a disastrous family canoe trip we took up in the Yukon.
And what is it about the poetry form that attracts you to it?
Oh gosh, well, I am very drawn to compression and succinctness, and the kind of astonishing pressure and power that a poem can pack into such often very small space, and the kind of magical, flip you can make in the middle of, the middle of such a compact space. I'm teaching prose poetry now, and I'm talking to my students about how, poems that turn at the line have a built-in flip at the end of every line. And so the challenge for writing a short prose paragraph is, how do you create something that kind of flips and something that turns and feels like alive rather than like a dead fish, in the space of something so short that's prose, and risks prosaicness otherwise.
The students are lucky to have you. David, why don't you come on, and then we three can talk to each other a little bit. Why don't Suzanne take a minute or two and talk about David's poetry, and then David say a few things about Suzanne's poetry. Suzanne?
Yeah, I'm such a fan of David's poetry. I don't even know where to start. Listening to you reading from your work today, reminded me just, I mean, I love the impeccable precision of your work, the specificity, the absolute fidelity to emotional and historical truth at the same time. And I love how your poems manage to walk this incredibly narrow line between, sardonic and poignant. Your poems I find so funny, but also so heartbreaking. And there's some of the poems have a kind of gossipy, vibe to them that's at the same time saturated with a kind of tenderness and nostalgia. So I love that, and I love how personal your work is, how obsessive it is. I love the way that you trust and lean into your obsessions. I've had David, speaking of my students, I've had David be a guest in classes I've taught over the years, and it is invariably the best class of the semester. Students just love to hear how open David is about his process, and how what kind of permissions you and your work give young writers to lean into material that doesn't seem high poetry necessarily. Lean into, you have a beautiful poem made out of the titles of lipsticks, or is it nail polish? Now I'm forgetting. But
Lipstick, yeah.
thank you, lipsticks. Just to trust that intuition and trust your own taste and your own inclinations. And also David's love of form and the playfulness he brings to writing sestinas and sonnets and pantoums and prose pieces. There's so much. There's a great deal I love about David. I'll stop there for a moment, I guess.
David,
No, and yeah, I loved what you read today, Suzanne. I had not heard any of it. It was great. And I too, I admire the conciseness in your work, and also I felt it very strongly today, a kind of pointedness, so that you're able to sort of make social comments, but coming through the personal, rather than stating it directly. So that and political too, and in your second book, I believe, you is Little Commentaries, right? This whole section of very short poems that I've always loved. So again, it's that conciseness, and you're able to do a lot in just a couple of lines. And then also in the Pillow book that you did, these amazing lists of often quite witty lists of things. Yeah, so is that enough? It's like,
Thank you.
there's more to be said, as we
Right.
all know, but we have to move on to our next show. So thank you once again for just a transfixing, exalting reading from David Trinidad and Suzanne Buffam. Our next Tuesday, we will have Corinne Conley, Bob Beecher, John Towie, and Beth Ruscio will read from Billy Collins's latest book, Water, Water. So thank you again, David Trinidad and Suzanne Buffam. And here's our wonderful host, Jennifer Clymer.
Thank you, Harry.